Hey, I'm going to get us started here officially. Everybody who's watching, we're so glad that you're with us today. I am thrilled that you're giving a little bit of your time. I'm a big believer that leaders are readers and leaders are always learning. And this is hopefully will be a great opportunity for you guys to learn some new ideas and some new techniques and maybe some new strategy as well. My name is Dave Adamson. I'm the Orange Australian and New Zealand director. And so I get to support a whole bunch of churches with rethinking the way that we do church in this part of the world, as well as resourcing churches with a whole bunch of great curriculums for family ministry and parents and students and kids as well. So I'm so glad that you're with us. We would love to know a little bit about you. I've been asking this since we started, but if you can please tell us what your name is and where you're watching from so that we can all get to know you. And another question I have for you is when it comes to student ministry in your church, in your ministry, in your community, I would love to know, and I'd love to track this in the chat as well. What is the biggest obstacle that you find to keeping students in your church? Is it sport? Is it cultural? Is it intellectual? Is there something in your community that pulls students away on a Friday night when you're doing student ministry? Is there something that keeps them away and they start dropping off? What would you say that is for your church that is the biggest obstacle that draws the students away from your church? I would love to know that, and maybe we can unpack that a little bit later on. Also want to let you know that if you've got a question for the panel at any time, please make sure that you use the Q&A feature right here on Zoom. Just click that button, type your answer out, that all the panelists will get it, and we can start to process those questions and hopefully provide some answers. That's really important as part of this next little while that we're on this call, because I 100% believe we can provide you with a whole heap of content about things and systems and strategies that we've learned, but content is not king, context is king. And if we can make this content contextualized to your community, to your church, to the students that you're leading and that you're supporting, then that's going to be way more helpful for you. And that can only happen if you ask questions and we can try to provide some answers and help you find some answers to the questions that you're asking from within your context. So please use that Q&A feature. That would be super, super helpful. And what I want to do later on in this call, and I know all the panelists are okay with this, if you've got a question, I might want to bring you on as a panelist to ask your question live to the panel or to whoever it is that you know, the panel member. So make sure you've done your hair and you've got all your stuff on and you know, all of that stuff. Make sure that your screen is clean, the camera is clean on your screen. That's a really important thing we learned earlier today. So if you've got a question, make sure you put it in the Q&A, and then I'll reach out to you if you want to come on and ask it yourself. That would be fantastic as well. We've got a whole bunch of great people who are joining us as attendees, but I would love for all of you guys to introduce yourselves and tell everybody who's watching this and who's watching it now or who's going to be watching it later on as we post this to YouTube and a bunch of other places. I would love to know not what your position is, but what your purpose is. How long have you been in student ministry? Why are you so passionate about student ministry? And I'm going to ask if Ashley can kick it off because she's the next one on my panel. Ashley, do you mind kicking us off? Why are you in student ministry and how long have you been doing this sort of thing?
Well, I've been working with teenagers for 17 years, first in the education system, then in athletics, and now in ministry. And I love it because I just love investing in the next generation. And I love like believing in people who may get overlooked and people may, you know, not think they have a lot to offer. And I have a heart for the underdog. And the other thing that I'm like so honored to have ever done in my life is to co-host a podcast with Dave Adams, and he was my co-host. You know what I'm saying?
Totally.
So, yeah.
I was your sidekick. I was your sidekick,
Something
superstar.
Like
I get it. I was totally your sidekick. You were the superstar of the show. Thank you, Ash. Really appreciate that. Hey, one more thing before I go on to the next person, which is going to be you, Candace, because you're next on my screen. If you want to ask a question of anybody at any time, use the Q&A. But also, if you're talking in chat, make sure you've got your settings to panelists and attendees so that we can all see your responses come up and your questions come up there as well. Candace, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're so passionate about students?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. And hey, everybody, it is so good to be able to be here with you all. For us, it's this evening. For you all, it's morning, right?
Yeah.
Did I get that right? So yeah,
Yeah.
so today, it's so good to be here with you all today, regardless of what today is. But again, like Dave said, my name is Candace, and I have the privilege of connecting with youth leaders literally around the world and just talking ministry and strategy. And I absolutely love that. My past, I've spent within the Southeast United States as a youth pastor and a next generation pastor I did that about 14, 15 years, something like that, before jumping on board with Orange. And I am so passionate about working with students because there was a song that I used to sing in the back of my grandmother's backyard, Whitney Houston, I believe the children are our future. And that just did something to me as like a 7-year-old girl singing that song about the children are our future. It just hit a chord in my heart. And in that moment, I knew that this is what I was meant to be doing. And I just want to pour into the future. No, thank you, Brett. I just want to be able to pour into the future of the world in any way that I can. And yeah, that's it.
Oh, that's so awesome. I love that. I'm not really sure how that song goes. Ash, could you like sing us a bar or two? No, she's on mute. It's totally fine. I'm not going to push. Ash, you've changed. Yes. Leslie, I'm going to go to you next. You're next on my screen. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience in student ministry and why you're so passionate about it.
Yeah, for sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. So I did the math a little bit ago and realized I've been working in student ministry for 15 years, which sounds incredibly odd to me. But I started out as a worship leader, just leading worship at a church, and then had a little bit of a band, and we would travel and lead worship and those kind of things, and then got into programming with summer camps and event planning and storytelling, and all of it kind of just met up with all of the things I'm really passionate about in creativity. And so ultimately, I think it would boil down to getting to tell stories that are outside of the box, that start new conversations, because students are willing to go there. And it's, I think anyone who gives their life to working with students knows that. Like, there's kind of this magical thing that they still have about them, even as they get older. And so I love that. I am here for it.
I love it. Thank you so much, Leslie. We're so glad that you're with us. Crystal, you're next on my list. Can you let everybody know some of the experience you've had with leading and coaching students specifically?
For sure. Hi, friends. I feel like I'm speaking into the future because you are tomorrow morning. This is so fun. Like, tell me how tomorrow's going to be. Feel free to put in the chat what we should expect tomorrow. I'm so excited about it. But I've been working with students for 18 years, first in education and later in youth ministry, both as a volunteer and as an interim youth pastor, a number of times as a communicator, and in a number of different roles. And I am completely addicted. I love it. I would not do anything different with my life. And I think one of the reasons is the more we understand about the brain at puberty and just after, the more we're learning that you can rewire the voice in someone's head for the rest of their life. And that window will eventually close just after they leave high school. And so we have this incredible opportunity to change the rest of their life in a really short period of time.
Wow, that's fascinating. I just wrote that down because, Crystal, I'm going to come back to you at some point and make sure you unpack that a little bit more. That's incredible. Rewiring the brain. I love it. I love it. Hey, Charlie, what about you? Tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience in student ministry.
Yeah, hi. I'm so glad that all y'all have joined us this evening. And that just sounded really Southern. And I'm really, I'd like to start over. But I've been working with students for, I don't know, over 20 years in first education and then in ministry. And recently I've been a volunteer youth pastor at a small church. And so that's been pretty difficult, but awesome at the same time. So I'm just really passionate because I'm really passionate for students to understand how loved they are, regardless of all the things. And so I just can't give it up. I'm like Crystal, I'm addicted to just being with the next generation.
That's so good. I love that. Well, I want to thank all of you for joining us on this panel. I know there's so much to discuss. Again, I'm going to just let everybody know if you've got a question about anything that I've got questions already based on just the introduction. So if you've got questions, make sure you put them in the Q&A so that we can all see them, and maybe I'll bring you on to have you ask your question. But I want to kick off the conversation in this way. Obviously, around the world, in the US and here in Australia, COVID has, is the topic of all conversation, specifically how that's impacted the church. And since we've got a whole bunch of church leaders on this call, I would love to ask this question, and maybe I'm going to direct it to you, Leslie. I hope that that's okay. I can direct this to you. But throughout COVID, what have you learned about the best ways, the best practices to connect with students from an online perspective? Whereas as churches locked down, a lot of us had to start connecting online. What are some of the things that you've learned, that you've discovered, that you could share with all the leaders here about how to connect with students online, leveraging technology?
Yeah, so I could literally talk about this all day. So I'm gonna ask Brett, will you be a friend and give me a timer so that I can like not or you can just hold up fingers. You can just tell me 10, 9, count me down, and I will stop talking. That would be so helpful. So no, seriously, I could talk about this all day because digital has come and we have all shown up into this space in a new way, you know, with new expectations and new rhythms. And I think there's so many things that are worth taking a pause to look at how are students showing up in these spaces. I'm going to give you 4 really high level, and if you have any questions to break down any of them, I am more than happy. The first one is I think we miss opportunities to collaborate with students. They are producers, not just consumers. We just keep pumping content towards them. We miss a big opportunity to collaborate with them. The second one would be, you know, learning how to, you don't just show up at someone's house and then make yourself at home and put your feet on their kitchen table and go in the refrigerator, right? And so there's this concept that our students were digital natives. This TikTok was theirs first before it was us being like, oh, let's put a message on there. Or Twitch was theirs first before we were like, let's stream a sermon before we play video games. And so there's something about it's their house, their rules. How can we learn to authentically communicate with them in their spaces? The third thing I would say is not just showing up where they are. I think that's kind of the lowest rung, the bare minimum of saying students are on TikTok, let's jump on TikTok. Students are on YouTube, let's jump on YouTube. But it's showing up where they are, when they're there, and how they are there, right? So it's showing up on Instagram, for instance, and doing a midnight snack at 12 a.m. is maybe a way outside of the box way to meet students where they are, when they are. So little things like that. And then the last one, I will just say really quickly, is considering that the internet itself has a massive personality. It is so multifaceted and multidimensional, and yet we tend to show up in 2 dimensions. A talking head and a chat box, right? That works for us as we are even here on this call. But I think as we connect with students, how can we get more multidimensional in learning styles and just opportunities to really connect with students with just so many more facets? So those are my 4 quick tips.
They're really good tips. They're great. I would love to know from all the people who are in the who are attendees of this call, what are some of the things that you have been leveraging, especially all the people, just so you all know on the panel. First of all, Charlie, I say you all the time, and everybody loves it when you say it way more than they love it when I say it. So you don't ever apologize for that. But just so you all know, there's a group of people who have joined us from a state in Australia called Victoria, and Victoria has been in lockdown probably more than any other state from a COVID perspective. Now, unlike in the US, if we get 1 case of COVID here, the whole state goes into lockdown. And so that's basically what's been happening. So I know the people who are watching from Victoria have been leveraging technology probably more than some other states in Australia and across New Zealand as well. So if you're watching and you're from Victoria, I'd love to know some of the things, because some of the things you've been doing, because we don't want to set ourselves up as experts. This is just a forum and an opportunity for us to all learn from each other. So I know that the stuff that you people from Victoria or any other state might be able to share, I'm sure the panelists will take notes as well and probably start sharing some of that stuff around. So please make sure you're doing that. Hey, has anybody got anything else to add as far as leveraging technology to connect with students before I move on? Doesn't look like it, so I'm going to move on. I'm going to move on to a question directed directly at Brett, because Brett, I overlooked you and didn't ask you to introduce yourself. So first of all, I want you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do and what your experience is with students.
Forgive you, Dave. I thought maybe you were just doing me a favor.
No, I wasn't.
Yeah, I'm a pastor's kid. I don't know if you're a pastor's kid. Let me know. Let me know in the chat. Or if you have pastors kids, as if you are on staff and your kids have to grow up in that environment. Actually, I had a pretty good, some people speak pretty ill of being a pastor's kid, but I had a pretty good experience. So my whole life has sort of been in ministry. I felt a call to ministry at a pretty young age. Went into full-time ministry at 21 years old in 2005 and have been in full-time student ministry world and all those kind of things that I get to do right now. But for me, my passions in ministry often revolve around the idea of helping students develop a healthy view of their faith early on. I think that it's not difficult for us to see when we, check out what faith is like in social media right now, that there are so many people who have walked away from their faith, who talk about their faith experience as being toxic or being harmful to them. And so I just have such a passion of not just working with students and teenagers, but also working with leaders that are working with students and teenagers of how do we, sorry, my timer is going off that I set for Leslie. Leslie, you did a great job. I don't know if anybody else heard that obnoxious beeping, but I apologize. But yeah, working with students and working with leaders who are leading students to help them develop healthy curiosity about faith and critical thinking skills when it comes to their faith, and how we set them up when they're teenagers to be on a lifelong journey of faith, not having everything figured out by the time, they graduate and they move on to quote unquote adulthood.
Wow, that's really good. Thanks for sharing that, dude.
Yeah.
Really appreciate that. So my question to you then, one of the things I asked right from the outset was I wanted people who are watching to share some of the obstacles that they're facing as far as keeping students in their student ministry goes. And we had a number of people write some great answers down about sometimes it's schoolwork as school increases, as people, students get to the senior levels, part-time jobs, sport is a big thing that removes people from churches here in Australia, especially because of the way the sporting system is set up. But Brett, what are some of the best ways, what are some of the best practices that you've learned over your time that can keep students connected to church as they get older into those senior years, year 10, year 11, year 12?
Yeah, I love the way that you asked that. How do we keep them connected to the church? And I think that there's a couple different layers of answers. It kind of depends on how we view what the church is. Do we view the church as community of faith and as the body and as people, or do we view the church as a place and a structure and programs? You're talking to a bunch of people who have devoted a lot of their lives to the structure, the place, the programs. And so we recognize and believe in the merit that can happen when students do show up to things and what can happen in those kind of settings. But I also think it's really, really important to us to figure out what does it look like for us to keep them connected to the church as far as their faith community, even in seasons of life where they're not as connected to the church as far as an actual structure, a place, and programs. For me, it took me a while to figure that out in ministry. And, whether we want to use the language relational discipleship or small groups or life groups or lead small is language that we use a lot. But that idea of how do we help build communities of students around their faith together, and how do we put caring, loving adults that are investing in their lives, not just, a semester at a time or a year at a time, but over seasons of their life that are really leading them. I think that there's a big shift that needs to happen in a lot of churches. This is one that took me a while to really understand, is that our volunteers should not be people who help make our programs happen, but our volunteers should really be the shepherds and the pastors themselves that are leading students in this journey of their faith through seasons. So in the midst of, COVID and everything that's been going on with lockdowns and shutdowns and for the last 18 months, it's been really interesting as we have conversations with so many different churches where last March, there was no programming. There was nothing to show up to basically for anybody, anywhere.
Yeah.
And it was interesting having conversations with church leaders. It was clear they're volunteers that understood their role being, my role is to help make a program happen. And the program doesn't happen anymore. You don't have a use for me. And I kind of check out. But then you talk to leaders who had volunteers that understood that, hey, my role is to lead this group of students through this season of life, through years 7 through 12 or 10 through 12, whatever the structure might look like. And maybe there's an environment or a program or a trip every now and then where we get to do some of that. But the spiritual responsibility that I've agreed to and that I feel is that I'm leading those students, whether or not I'm showing up to a program or not. And so helping to build those systems and that structure and design your ministry in a way where it's not just about what happens in a program, but it's about facilitating those faith communities and how are we developing leaders to lead those where it's not us having to lead all those. Sorry, that was a lot.
No, that's great, dude. That was like a fire hose, but it was a good fire hose. So thank you for sharing that. Hey, Ash, I would love to ask you the same sort of question. What's some of the things that you've learned that can help keep students connected as they move into becoming seniors in high school? Because that's certainly something that, as I've talked to church leaders in Australia, they're dropping off. It happens quite often around year 10, year 11, year 12, students start to stop coming. From your experience, Ash, what are some things that you've found, some techniques that you've found that can help keep those students connected for longer?
It's such a good question, and it's something I'm wrestling with a lot. I actually just finished leading my 8th grade group of girls, and towards the end of their 8th grade year, they started kind of falling off too. And we've been having a lot of conversation about like, how do we as ministry leaders, I know it's easy to like create systems and your small groups, your volunteers fit within our system so that we can stay organized as ministry leaders, especially when we have multiple jobs and you're trying to, if you have your own children or you have, you know, a second job, or maybe you're a volunteer youth pastor like Charlie. And I think that one of the things we've been talking a lot about is just the importance of making sure it gets like your structure gets more organic as students get older, and that they have something to look forward to. I think that's so important. Like if grade 7, grade 8, and grade 9, it's predictable of what they're what's going to happen by the time they get their driver's license. They already know what they're missing. So they're not, you know, they may not show up, and there may not be a different kind of opportunity for them, or there may not be the flexibility and the structure that is needed as a kid begins to, you know, become an adult in their faith and learn how to have an everyday faith, no matter if they show up to program or not. But I would say that I would love to throw this to Crystal, because I'd love to hear, she's our high school expert for the older ages, and I would love to hear what her thoughts are on that.
Yeah.
I agree 100% on the point about anticipation. We know that students are wired for novelty. And so if the programming looks the same in year 7 as it does in year 12, why would they come back? What is there to look forward to if it's the same pattern? I'm not even sure that I, as an adult, want church to look the same 6 years from now as it does right now. And so changing up our program and creating unique environments for different age groups is really important. The other thing that we're learning, for years, we worked on a project called the Phase Project that just helped us understand student development. And what we learned is the earlier years of high school, year 7, year 8, year 9, students are just in a different place developmentally than they are in year 10, year 11, and year 12. One of those differences that I'm beginning to notice and that we're starting to see in research as well is that the biggest thing that will make a younger student walk away or a younger student check out is confusion. If they don't understand the words we're saying, they may politely nod along, but they may not be able to retain the information, and it may not seem useful to them, and they may walk away. But on the flip side, as they get older and the information is not a problem, what makes them walk away is condescension. And so if you're speaking to the entire group, year 7 through year 12, and you're speaking at a level young enough for your year 7s to understand, it feels condescending to your year 11s. It feels like you're talking to children. And so we have to find venues to begin to speak to them in different ways. We know that our younger students think like engineers. They're putting blocks together. They're beginning to understand how concepts fit together. But our older students think like philosophers, and they're asking the question, why? Why does this matter? Why should I believe it? Why should I continue to show up here every week? And it's really difficult to answer both of those questions in the same setting. Wow.
Okay, so can you unpack a little bit more, Crystal, that engineer philosopher thing? Because, unlike in the US, in Australia, in the US, I know that you would have a middle school program and then a high school program that really separates them from a church organizational level. Yet here in Australia, here in New Zealand, a lot of churches, I would probably say 95%, correct me if I'm wrong, chat, on this, 95% of churches do a Friday night youth night where it's year 7 to year 12. So I would love to unpack that a little bit more from you. Year 7s, are they the engineers? And what does that look like? Can you unpack that a little bit? And at what point do they move into that philosopher mindset? And what's one way that the people who are watching can start to respond to them in that capacity?
Well, first, let's acknowledge that the American way is not necessarily the right way, and we disagree with each other a lot. In fact, we know
in America that you all disagree with each other in America, like it's really
constantly. It's our pastime.
The
our national pastime. We've given up sports, and we just make our only sport disagreeing with one another. Yeah. But we know there's a dividing line in the way that students think. And in some American schools, that dividing line happens at year 8, and they go to a different school in year 9. And other American schools, it's year 9, and they go to a different school at year 10, and we call them different things, and we argue about which is better. Yeah. Neither is. But we know that somewhere between year 9 and 10, there's a dividing line, or between year 8 and 10, there's a dividing line in the way that students think. And I think it has a lot to do with how puberty changes the brain. Puberty causes us to grow a lot of neural connections, and then through a process called pruning, the connections we don't use die. And so our brains sort of begin to solidify, or begin the process of solidifying in later high school years. And what ends up happening is that in our early high school years, our year 7, year 8, year 9, our students think like engineers, meaning they see different concepts and they need to put them together. They may need someone to explain the connection. It's not quite as intuitive as saying a strand of sentences with 3 important ideas. We need to pull out each idea, break it down so that it's understandable, and talk about it in really, really simple terms. In fact, one of the things that we talk about when we're coaching communicators in churches is making content digestible. We don't want to make it so dense that it's really difficult for a student to digest. We want to make it as simple and quickly digestible as possible because it's so important. As students approach that dividing line, something changes in the brain, and they begin to move out of the engineer phase and into the philosopher phase. And they're asking the question, why? Why should I do that? Why should I still believe that? A lot of that has to do with a change in the brain that's actually biological. It's not sociological. It's a change from seeing the parent as the primary information giver to seeing their peer as a primary information giver. And so when that change happens, they begin to look back at the adult figures in their life and ask the question, why, and why again? Because it's the first time they felt the permission to begin to question the way it's always been done. And as the church, we have such an opportunity to come along and help answer the question why, and begin to walk with them into this stage where they begin to decide, not what does my mom's faith look like, or what does my grandparent or what does my church leader's faith look like, but what does it look like to personalize this faith for me?
Yeah. Wow.
Sorry, that's a lot of words.
No, that was outstanding. There's so much to unpack there. I have no doubt. In fact, like, I'm not going to lie, my phone has been buzzing with people asking a few more questions about that. But before I move on to another question, I would love to bring in somebody from the chat. Jess Cristanto has a question. I'm going to promote you, Chris, right now to being a panelist. You should get something. I don't know what that looks like, but you should get something, and we should see you pop up any minute. There we go. Look at this. It's the magic of technology is working.
Hi.
Hey, Chris.
Hi, friends.
We surfed together at Orange Conference a few years ago. That's where
Oh,
we met.
really? That's awesome.
2018.
Well, Jess,
Forever ago.
Jess, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself, like introduce yourself to everybody? And then you had such a great question. So if you wouldn't mind just sharing who you are, where you're from.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Jess. I'm from Crossway Baptist Church in Melbourne. We're on the southeast suburbs of Melbourne in Burwood East. This is my number 3. This is Hannah, the joy
Hey,
supportive.
Hannah.
Yay! Yeah, so I'm the youth. I'm one of the 3 youth pastors there. I'm part-time. Our youth ministry is well, pre-COVID. I think we're up to like kind of 400 young people and leaders that comes every Friday night. So yeah, so between the 3 of us, we kind of lead that ministry together. Yeah, is that all?
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And what was your question?
Yeah. So my question is like, I'm hearing all you ladies like been in youth ministry for like 15, 18, 20 years. And that's like amazing. And like, I remember reading somewhere that, you know, the average youth ministry lifespan is like 18 months. And people kind of see youth ministry or youth pastoring as a stepping stone towards being like a senior pastor or, you know, other ministry opportunities. How do you stay that long in youth ministry? Like, how do you keep up with the young people? How do you stay relevant? You know, I'm already finding it like kind of taxing now with Friday nights, hanging out with leaders. We go to Macca's, you know, until midnight and all that sort of stuff. And then next morning, like I have to look after the little ones and just kind of like, oh man, it's full on. How do you do it?
I'm opening that to anybody who wants to jump in and answer.
I vote Charlie Condor goes first, and she has the most years experience.
Great.
I was just thinking about this because Jess, I was just kind of giving myself a gold star because I feel like I've survived parenting kids because my kids are 22 and 23 and survived youth ministry all these years too. I'm just gonna be really honest with you. You gotta create some healthy rhythms. And sometimes it's saying no, and sometimes it's passing things off that you love really and that you've invested in, but you've got to trust other people with what you've created. And then caring for yourself. I think youth leaders put everybody first before themselves and feel this weird guilt about it. I know I have. But you got to prioritize you and your family and put them first. And so really being healthy with those rhythms and don't feel guilty about it.
So good. Brett, I see that hand.
Yes, I've got one. So I've got some friends that help run this thing that's called the National Network of Youth Ministries in the States that is all about helping build communities of student pastors that are leading ministries together. And they have an interesting stat that says, you know, the average youth pastor, you know, length of a stay is, you know, between 18 months and 3 years. If they don't have some sort of a community that they're investing in and that is investing in them. If they do, that number is closer to 9 years. So that is always a really challenging reminder. And it sounds like you're on staff with multiple people that are leading, which is a great start. But even finding people outside of your own space to be able to connect with and just kind of share the burdens of ministry together, because ministry is a very burdensome role. And when we try to carry that on our own, or even within our own faith community, it sometimes becomes unbearable. And so inviting other people in, finding those kind of networks and communities to be able to lead through those things together, I think is important.
Such a great answer, Brett. Such a great answer.
I want to chime in on this really quickly. I think it's hard, right? I have 2 young, I see your kids are young. My kids are pretty young too, right? And I think it's really, really hard, especially when your kids are young, trying to, you know, just juggle ministry and all of its demands. And especially as you get older, I know I found as I got older, the things that once came more natural to me about just being connected culturally and what's happening in the world was much easier. As I got older and I got married and I had kids, those things I stopped caring about. I didn't have my ears to the ground in the same capacity in which I once did, right? And I used to start texting students and like, hey, I need a reference for this. And I was trying really, really hard to connect. And I realized this is not me. And I stopped trying so hard to talk about whatever the popular song was or whatever the popular meme was. And I just started being my authentic self.
Mm.
And I just started bringing who I was there, you know, and I feel like that worked too. You know, I feel like yeah, we're supposed to be culturally relevant, right? But when it starts being, you know, what's the word called? Fake, right? And it's not authentic, then it does more harm than it does good, you know? So I think that if you just bring who you are authentically, some of those, the disconnect with that will come into place. And then also I use my students to babysit too. I just want to go back on you.
That's so good.
We have trips. Hey, you take this one and you take that one.
I was gonna jump off of something Charlie said. I think like finding the areas of ministry that totally drain you, whether that's people or whether that's like details, whatever it is, teaching, whatever it is, whatever drains you. How can you find like a stellar volunteer or you know, pass it off to another staff member or somebody that you can take this thing that's draining the heck out of you and give it away. And equal to that, and maybe even more important, is don't forget to make time for the things that give you life. Like the things that actually remind you why you're doing what you do. Like the day one that just started in youth ministry, who was she and what made her love it? Like find those things to help fill you and try to get rid of the things that drain you. I think that is what's helped me stay in it for this long.
Wow, that's really good. You all answered that so well. Jess, thank you so much for your question. Thank you so much for being willing to jump on.
Thank you.
I feel like I want you to stay, and you're welcome to stay, or I can switch it off. But because you got kids there, I kind of feel like maybe I should let you go and keep just listening as well.
There might be a distraction.
Okay.
Tell Tim we said hi.
We'll do.
Yeah, tell
We'll
Tim we said hello.
Yep.
Tell Tim we said hello. And Jess, can I just add one extra thing? We've got a Facebook community in Australia of people in your position. I'm not sure if you're already on it. If you are, great. And I want to just let everybody else know, like what Brett said and what everybody said actually about finding those community, those people who can come alongside you is so important. So please make sure you join our Facebook group. I can't even remember what it is, but I'll leave it in the chat in just a few minutes, and so that you can click on it and get to it. Jess, thank you so much for asking a question.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Hey, if you all have any questions of your own, please make sure you drop them into the Q&A section. Put them into the chat if that's easier for you. I'd love to bring some other people on as well and have you guys ask your own question to this amazing panel with over 105 years, Ash, of student ministry experience on this call right now. That's pretty incredible, isn't it? I think that's amazing. Hey, we actually just got Andrew asked a question, and I'm not even going to read it. I'm just going to bring Andrew on as a guest. Andrew, normally I would ask if it's okay if I could bring you on, but I'm just going to promote you now. So hopefully you're all camera ready to go and you can ask your question to the panel directly. Everybody, this is Andrew. I'm not sure where Andrew is from, and I'm not even sure if he's going to join. He's joining. There he is.
I'm on. Hello.
Hey, Andrew. Tell us a little bit about where you're from and what you do, and then ask your question.
Right. So I'm the associate pastor at Mooralbark Baptist Church, which is in the outer eastern suburbs of Melbourne. We're sort of reimagining our ministry to teenagers and young people post-COVID. So we've come out of COVID and sort of doing a big regroup as a church. One of the challenges we're sort of facing at the moment is we've got some really committed and super passionate parents who are really keen to see their young people continue in the church. But I think one of the struggles that we have in that space is their frame of reference for ministry is their own experience of being in youth ministry sometimes 15, 20 years ago. So there's a very strong desire to see that replicated for their own children. So I guess my question is about how do you manage parent partnership where you've got super committed and passionate parents, but their perspective of ministry is different to what young people today are facing?
I'm going to throw this open. I think, Leslie, I want you to kick it off and then everybody else can jump in.
Yeah, that makes me think of, there's a partnership we have with parents, right? They are so crucial and important as an influence in their students' lives. And we always just want to partner with them. And so I think part of it is opening up space for them to feel like they've been completely heard, right? How can we hear exactly what they want? And I think what we're going to find out is that parents are invested in the future of their students, right? Parents are passionate about knowing my kid is going to succeed and they're going to grow. And when they leave me, they're going to be, they want to see this future. And then at the same time, I think it kind of goes back to this idea of collaborating with the students. What parent can deny when your student says, as an answer to the parent's direct question, like, oh, this is XYZ, how I would handle it. And so I wonder if there's some kind of collaboration we could have between hearing what parents want, gathering how students would answer it, and kind of sitting in the middle of formulating kind of a strategy that both people feel heard. So that's the first thing that comes to mind for me.
Awesome.
Who else wants to jump in and add to that? Yes, Crystal.
I would just first say congratulations on having parents who are super passionate and want to volunteer. I know that's not true in every ministry. That is huge, and it says a lot about your leadership. You must be doing something amazing for parents to gather around you and say, I want to be a part of that. That's huge. One conversation that has been helpful for me in this area, especially with the parents of some of the girls that I've been leading, is to begin to talk about generations. And this is what Generation X was like. This is why a certain model of youth ministry worked for them. Here's what the millennials, which we should have just kept calling them Gen Y, but we called them millennials for some reason. Here's what the millennials were like. Here's how that youth ministry model had to change to fit the millennials. Here's what we know about Generation Z. Here is how we see youth ministry changing so that it accommodates Generation Z. For us, at least, that's been a really helpful conversation to help parents very kindly and very gently remember that they're from a different generation.
I would just add to that too. If you can get one parent to understand that, and that one parent is the one who explains it to the other parents consistently, it will be like a better situation for you, because it's like someone from that age group saying it to that same age group. You know what I'm saying?
I think that one of the best places to start is by trying to get at the heart of all of it. Is in the reality is what you want and what they want is the same. Is that you want their kids to develop a faith of their own and to be like all of you guys align on all of those pieces. And so to me, that's going to be the best place to start, is having those conversations where you can both verbally recognize, hey, we all want the same thing. And like they're saying, the language that I use for that is, how can I raise the tension? So whether it's leadership at my church that doesn't quite understand something, or the parents that don't quite understand something, or my volunteers that don't quite understand something, how do I raise the tension so that they feel the same thing that I feel? And sometimes you can do that through, statistics and what Crystal is talking about, and helping them better understand culturally what's happening. Using brain science is an awesome way, because people can't really argue against some of those things unless some of these parents are brain scientists, which probably isn't super likely. But yeah, how do we start off on the same page to make sure that our foundations are at the same place? And then how do we raise the tension about these things that Ashley and Crystal and Leslie have talked about, so that they feel and recognize, oh, okay, what I needed. And that's kind of, it's a personal thing. Well, hey, but this is what made my faith what my faith is when I was 13, and I want that for my son or for my daughter. And you just have to try to raise that tension to the point where they recognize, like, oh, I want the same thing for my daughter, but the way that that's going to happen is probably going to need to look different than mine.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. Andrew, what a great question. Thank you so much, man. I know that was helpful for a bunch of other people as well. So thank you so much for being willing to come on. Thank you for asking that question. And I'm going to let you go as well. So thank you so much for joining us. Hope you are surviving lockdown and everything really well also.
Thanks,
Cheers,
guys.
mate.
Appreciate it.
Cheers.
And just one quick thing. We mentioned the history of youth ministry. We also mentioned teenage brain science. Some of us are part of a podcast called Rethinking Youth Ministry, and there were 2 episodes about that where we brought in a brilliant leader named Mark Ostreicher. I dropped links to both of those episodes in the chat because they were really helpful for me and I learned a lot.
That's awesome, Crystal. I was actually going to ask you, Anna had asked in the chat where you got those stats from about the brain rewire, the engineer stuff. Does that get covered in those 2 podcast episodes?
Pieces of it get covered. That was part of a long research project that we did. Probably the best source is a book called It's Just a Phase, So Don't Miss It by Kristen Ivey and Reggie Joyner. Several of us were contributors to that book, and a lot of the research ends up in that book. You can find it at justaphase.com. And then there are a number of other books, Teen Stages by Ken and Elizabeth Meller, The Teenage Brain by Frances Jensen, and just a number of other student adolescent development books have been really helpful for us.
Yeah, that's great. I'm going to ask, first of all, I'm going to let Prue know. I'm about to bring you on, Prue. We all go back a long way with Prue, right? So we're going to bring Prue on in a minute. I forget what her nickname was, if somebody can scroll back and figure out what that is as I bring her in. But also I'm going to ask Brett or somebody on the team here, if you don't mind just dropping the link to that book, It's Just a Phase. Don't miss it. If you could drop a link to that, that would be awesome. And if it was an amazon.com.au link, that would be even better. And if you're not able to do that, don't worry about it. I'll figure it out and I'll drop it in the chat as we go along. So this is Prue. She's been here since about 10 minutes before we started, and she's about to ask a fantastic question, I've no doubt. Prue, how are you?
We lost you there for a second, Dave.
Prue, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and this is a great opportunity. Love it.
Awesome. Tell us what your question was, Prue. And what was your nickname again?
My nickname was Prue Bear.
Prue Bear.
Yeah, I loved Pooh Bear growing up. We knew the Pooh, so yeah, I got nicknamed that. So
love it. I love it. So tell us what your question is.
So last year we had a team of about 9 youth leaders, and I had recently taken over. Sorry, I'll just stop my kid's toy going off. There we go. Sorry. Yeah, so once COVID hit, like we lost all bar one other leader. So there's myself and that other leader. She's a really passionate lady, like she's awesome. And we as a church have been following the 3DM model. Not sure if you guys are familiar with that, but it's talking about the communities and working on communities instead of programs. And so trying to rebuild, we have that trouble with the, we've traditionally done the years 7 to 12 program on a Friday night the whole time, and just working out how we can rebuild from that, because I went on maternity leave all at the same time as well. Yeah, ideas on how to rebuild from that with the youth that we have had previously, but also getting new youth in as well, and what things might work in that too.
Who wants to jump on for that one? Charlie?
Prue, I just want you to know that I'm experiencing the same thing at my church. It's been really hard. We've lost so many volunteers and so many students. And so I want everyone else to give answers because I have been struggling with the same thing. Yeah. It's been hard.
Who wants to help Prue and Crystal?
I want to say one thing,
and
Prue.
Charlie.
One of the things we've been focusing on is connections. And so every little thing we're trying to connect with students, whether it's a picnic in the park, whether it's snow cones at the play, whatever, we're just trying to connect and create lots of opportunities to give students to show up in new ways and hopefully bring their friends.
Yeah.
Prue, did you mention that it was you and one other person as the people leading it, and then you have a few students still there? So are you focusing on building your volunteer base or your student base, or both at the same time?
Well, sort of both at the same time, because obviously to have more students, we've got to have more leaders as well. Our church is reduced by about a third as well in all of that. So trying to find volunteers is really hard
Yeah.
to do that too.
Totally. I've always found one of the best ways to find volunteers is for the few students that are still there, asking them, who in the church do you wish would come hang out with us on Friday night? And then let them tell you a name, call that person and be like, I asked of everyone in our church who they wanted to come to hang out. And they said you. I mean, who can say no to that? You know what I mean?
Yeah. A lot of our youth don't actually come to church.
Okay.
So that is a little bit harder. But the ones that do, like, we can certainly do that. Yeah.
I have a question.
Great idea.
Just to, and I'm sorry, I really like asking questions. I mean, I love talking ministry, right? Let me just say, I could probably talk ministry and talk about creative ideas all day long, but I really like talking with people, not to people, right? So thank you for being here, Prue. But what are some things that you all have already done to reconnect with students?
So we've tried changing the day. So we're doing it on a Saturday afternoon at the moment. Obviously going back into lockdown, we've had to stop that as well. But we're finding that sports is a big thing, especially for the younger group that gets interrupted on a Saturday. So they're off doing all of that and not wanting to come to youth group. We've had a group of about 4 of the year 10 to 12s that have been coming, which has been great, but that's all that we've had at all. Yeah.
Is there anything that you all have done? And I know, you've been on maternity leave, and I can't imagine how challenging that's been for you. So kudos to you. You are the real MVP. Okay. But has there been anything that has been able to remain consistent when it comes to connecting with students? Like, is there sort of maybe newsletter, email that goes out, text message, social media, something that's been able to remain consistent?
Yeah, so there's a Facebook and Instagram page that the other leader absolutely loves running. So that's great because that's not my forte. So yeah, she's taken that on really well. I think this term, the interruption has been that we've had to go into lockdown, out of lockdown, into lockdown. So we're going backwards and forwards a bit this term. And we just don't know, like, it's asking those questions that want to prompt the kids to answer, but we don't get any answers out of them as to what they want to do and that sort of thing.
And I wonder, Prue, as you're talking, because I know COVID has been challenging for a lot of people, and I know that and I personally started experiencing some anxiety amid COVID. I have never experienced anxiety in my life before, right? And I wonder how a teenager might have navigated some of that, right? And how it might have potentially caused a crisis of faith, possibly for them or their parents, and how they could be just engaging where they are when it comes to engaging God, right? Or how they are, just navigating, choosing to prioritize other things, right? But I thought about this a little bit earlier, and I'm glad we came back around here. But I think what you're experiencing, Prue, is something that a lot of churches are experiencing. So I really want to just normalize that for you. A lot of churches lost a lot of students and families amid COVID, and a lot are trying to navigate, trying to figure out how exactly do we reconnect. So you all are not alone in that. Absolutely, you're not alone. And I just want to really just say that. But I also wonder, in thinking about, because some of the, here in the States, when you get older high school years, students begin to fall off here too when it comes to going to church. A lot of times they do, right? And I just wonder, I'm glad Dave asked that question in the beginning, because I really wonder, what is it that's pulling their attention? What is it that's pulling them away from being able to being at the church? And how can we meet them there physically, or how can we meet them there figuratively, right? So the physical piece, like, where are they hanging out? If it's sports, what does it look like to possibly, even if you're just getting together with 1 or 2 or 3 other students and say, hey, we're going to this person's game. what does that really look like to build community or relationships among students? Or if there's a spot that, they hang out, whether it's a weekly planned gathering or something that's sporadic, saying, hey, let's hang out at this spot, or let's have group at this spot. That is a spot that a lot of students frequent. Because if you take the church outside of the building into the place in which they are, then some of the barriers that students might feel entering the space or re-entering the space are torn down a bit, because they're in different kind of setting and they're a lot more relaxed when you are just kind of on the neutral turf kind of a thing, right? So some of those kind of just, local meetups have proven to be really effective when it comes to meeting students. And then what you have the opportunity of doing there too is you're exposed to more students than what you possibly would have been if you're just waiting for them to come to you. But if you're speaking about connecting with students more so figuratively and connected where they are mentally, Ashley kind of hit on this a little bit earlier. But if it's because a lot of people in the chat were talking about they're just overwhelmed with school. It seemed like a lot of students have a lot going on with school and just the demands that come along with that. But the reality is, they're just overwhelmed trying to figure out how do you navigate and how do you prioritize your faith amid what's happening in real life, right? And that's something that, hi, I'm 30, I don't know how old I am. 6. And I still struggle with that, right? Trying to figure out how do you prioritize faith amid real life sometimes. And I wonder if we could meet up with students and show them how to do that by just meeting up with them in their natural environment, their natural space, and show them how to do it. How far would it take them in life if they learn how to do those things, prioritize their faith and prioritize church in their youth? And I'm not saying coming to you, but us going to them and us being, in their space. Or maybe if it's everyone is studying, hey, maybe we're getting together at a certain coffee shop or at a certain outside park, or maybe even it's at the church. We're all coming together and we're just doing homework. Maybe we might talk for 20 minutes, but if homework is priority and we just really want to lay eyes on you and connect with you, we can maybe do like a 20-minute devotional. Let's bring our books out and let's do homework together. Because through that establishing that relationship, then the eventual discipleship comes and you have the great opportunity of having their ear and getting them to the place that you want them to be, which is within the church. And that was my long rant and I'm going on mute now.
I loved what you just shared, Candace. And I can say like from experience, I shared a little earlier, my girls just finished 8th grade. I had 27, I'm a volunteer small group leader at my church. I had 27 girls on my roster in my small group, right? And, a lot of them were showing up in the first half of their 8th grade year, and then the second half of the 8th grade year set in, and not a lot of them were showing up. And it was really hard as a leader to keep showing up when they were not showing up. Like, it was really difficult. And I'm like, I do this for a living. I feel like a failure, like I'm supposed to know how to get them to come. But I honestly, like there was like 2 mindset shifts and strategy shifts that I had to make in my mind. And we talk about this a lot, but like, what does it look like to really value the roster over who's actually in the building? Like, I think all of us in COVID had to value the roster differently because nobody could come to the building. So like, what does it look like Candace was just saying, to show up on their turf or just connect in text message? Like my last few months with my 8th graders was literally conversations through text message. They didn't want to get together. They weren't friends anymore. They didn't want to come to the church building. There were all kinds of things happening. And I had to make a decision. I'm going to keep showing up. I'm not expecting them to anymore, but I'm going to show up just in case they do. And when they show up, I will be here. But what I'm going to put my energy towards is not how do I get them in the building, like Candace said, but how do I literally figure out where they are in life and whether it's, and start measuring different, not how many are in attendance, but how many kids did I connect with this week?
That's great. That is great. Candace, you can... Brett, go.
Sorry, I've got one more quick piece with that too, is that I think that we need to be careful to redefine our own expectations on what wins are, especially in the midst of what ministry looks like with lockdown and coming out of lockdown, going back into lockdown, all of those kind of things. My wife's a small group leader and was getting really frustrated, exactly what Ashley was talking about for the same reasons. And all of a sudden they stopped texting her back. And so my wife was like, I'm not getting anything back. And I was trying to remind her that like, you still texting them matters. Like your text to them is a digital reminder of the presence of God with them. Like it reminds them that there is someone who still cares about them. And hopefully at least subconsciously reminds them that there is a God who is still there despite anything that's happening. So just a little bit of encouragement to keep going, to keep trying, to keep reaching out. And whether or not they respond the way we want them to, we can't let that be what we grade ourselves by.
Yeah, that's great. That is great. Prue, thank you so much for your question. I hope that was helpful. And I just want to let you know, if you've got any other questions, or if you want to connect with other student leaders, high school pastors and leaders, just go to Facebook and look for the Orange Australia and New Zealand group. That's the group that we've got. We'd love to keep answering questions. And all these guys are always helping me out with answering questions. So Prue, thank you so much. You're the best. Prue Bear. Thanks, Prue Bear.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Hey guys, we've gone past the top of the hour, and I want to honor everybody's time, because it looks like from Crystal and Leslie's screens, at least, it's getting very dark over there in the US, or there's a power outage. I'm not 100% sure which it is. So I want to honor your time. I want to honor everybody else on the call's time as well. But if I can get through 3 really quick things. The first one is this. Because you're on this call, you registered to be on this call, I'm going to send you an email with a link to this content so that you can have access to it and watch it with your teams at your church, maybe show your lead pastors, executive pastors, whoever. You're not going to get any other emails from me. I'm not going to spam you. I'm just going to send you a link to this, and then I'm going to erase all of your email details. That's not what this is about. Second is, I just wanted to let you all know that, we all work for a company called Orange, and we're an Orange company. We're a company that is about church strategy, and we want to help you guys as much as humanly possible. And that's my role here. And the best way to do that is just to join that Facebook group that I just mentioned. And third thing is this. I'm going to put Crystal on the spot. Because Crystal, one of the things that as I talk to Australian church leaders who have heard about Orange, I want to be super candid with you. They say, hey, we love the Orange stuff, but it feels too American. You've got snow during Christmas, and Australia and New Zealand, we have summer during Christmas. And, that's some of the pushback that I get. And I think I'm looking at it going, it's completely valid. It's completely valid. But I'm going to put you on the spot, because you emailed me a couple of days ago, and you said some great news that we're producing some content that's not US based necessarily. So could you just talk about that just for 30 seconds?
Absolutely. And also, I'm sorry for the dark and moody lighting. It was much brighter when we started this call, but we are growing as an organization in the global community. I wanted to make sure that we are serving all of our partners really well. And part of that means listening to conversations about things like, hey, when you talk about snow at Christmas, that doesn't really work for us because it's summertime here. And so we've made some adjustments in curriculum to make sure that we're honoring all of our partners. One of those is no weather related references at any time, because we will be wrong. No matter what weather we reference at any time of year, we'll be wrong. Another change is you'll see us moving language from fall, winter, summer, and spring into season 1, season 2, season 3, season 4, because we recognize, of course, that fall in the US is not necessarily fall in the rest of the world. And so talking about things in terms that make sense for everyone seem to make sense for us. And also, I would just say this, there's no such thing as an out of the box, read verbatim curriculum. If someone tries to tell you there is, they are lying to you. In fact, even in our own community, when my church hands me a discussion guide and we live in the same community, I say, this can't possibly work for my students. I need to make some adjustments because no one knows them like I know them. And no one knows your students like you know them. So feel free to contextualize everything that we create. It's meant to do that. It's built so that you can rearrange series in an order that makes sense for your community. You can change questions, you can change content, and everything is editable because we recognize nobody knows your students quite like you know them. And you're the best person to arrange that content for them.
Yeah, so good. That is so good. Thank you for sharing that, Chris. I know I put you on the spot with stuff that I wasn't even sure if I was allowed to talk about yet, because it's very wet cement at the moment. And just to that point, I started this call by saying that content isn't king, context is king. And so we want to provide content, that you would put into context. And one of the ways that we help you do that is, first of all, I'm Australian and I'm here and I'm local, and I'm happy to take phone calls or Zoom calls and help you in any way that I can to support you in what you're doing as a student leader. And we also have Charlie. One of the reasons she's on this call, apart from being brilliant and being so experienced and everything, is she is our orange specialist for Australia. So if you've got any questions about how to contextualize something, how to move something from baseball language into AFL language or NRL language, then Charlie's like, I don't know what either of those acronyms are, but I'm going to help Charlie, and Charlie's going to help you, and that's how we're going to figure this out. So if you've got any questions about any of that, I want you to email me. I'm going to put my email. I'm going to give you my email is well, Charlie just put hers, charlie@thinkorange.com, and mine is just dave@thinkorange.com. So please make sure you reach out to either of us. We would love to connect with you, and we just really want to support you. We want to cheer you on. We all pray for you, and we all care about you deeply. And in fact, just to close this call out, Crystal, would you mind just praying for everybody here in Australia and New Zealand and the unique struggles that we have? Would you mind doing that for just a minute, and then we'll close out this call?
For sure. Heavenly Father, thank you for being the God of the entire planet and more. And we're just so grateful that you have created means for us to have conversations and to act like the family that we are, even on calls like this one. Lord, I lift up my brothers and sisters in Australia and New Zealand. God, I pray that you give them just a special sense of energy, a special sense of motivation, a reminder of everything that they're doing and how important it is. And God, I also just pray your peace over each and every one of them. The last year has been incredibly difficult, but it has never for once taken you off the throne. And so we just recognize that with you in control, our hearts can be at peace. You love our students more than we do. And we are just grateful to be your servants in their lives. And it's in your name, amen.